Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to our series Global Leaders Insight. Today's conversation is about one universal challenge, organizational integration after cross-border acquisitions. So today we are honored to welcome David, CEO of Wexley Consulting, to join us in an in-depth discussion on this topic. Hi, David. It's really great to see you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you have had a long and very rich career from leading organizational transformation in a global company like Siemens to now running your own consulting practice here in the US. What I really appreciate is that you have seen organizational integration challenges, not only between China and the US, but also between European and the US, and across many different cultures. That's exactly why I believe today's conversation will be extremely valuable for Chinese entrepreneurs who are navigating US expansion right now. So before we dive in, could you briefly introduce yourself and your consulting company to our audience?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here. A little bit about me. My career has focused on global leadership and organizational transformation in complex, high-pressure environments. I spent many years working inside large multinational organizations, including Siemens and Booz Allen. And there I led strategy execution, post-merger integration, and leadership change across cultures. Actually, I've worked across 75 countries, and over the years, I've worked extensively with Fortune 500 and FTSE 100 companies, supporting senior leaders as they are navigating acquisitions, global growth, and the increasing complexity of today's business environment. These days, I run my own consulting firm in the US, where we work with executives and founder leaders through rapid change, global teams, accelerated M&A activity, digital transformation, and now more recently, the impact of AI. Increasingly, that work includes Chinese entrepreneurs expanding into the US and other international markets. I've also co-authored a book that is coming out called Working Scared. It will be released in May. And the book looks at how the intensity of the modern global business environment creates pressure and uncertainty that can slow down decision-making and reduce productivity. And in this book, we offer really practical and proven techniques that employees and leaders can use to manage their stresses so they can maintain high performance even through the turbulent times we live in. Now, one thing I want to mention, one insight that has stayed really constant across my career, and that is the importance of culture. Culture is not a soft issue. It's a performance issue. And especially during a bicultural integration, when leaders misunderstand culture, integration loses momentum. Conversely, when leaders work with it deliberately, they gain speed and trust and ultimately better results.
Thank you, David. What really stands out to me is your point that culture is not a soft issue, it's a performance issue. Across global organizations, culture either accelerates integration or quietly slows it down. And before we move on, I also want to say congratulations on your upcoming book, Working Scared. I think the topic is incredibly relevant. I'm really looking forward to reading it. That perspective actually connects very well to what we are discussing today. Many Chinese entrepreneurs feel frustrated because they cannot move the US team when acquiring US company. But from your experience, do European companies face similar challenge when acquiring US companies?
They do. They absolutely do. And this is where that insight I mentioned about culture really matters comes from, because I've seen it so often. Culture is not a soft topic, but a performance issue. I really want to emphasize that. European companies often assume that acquiring a US company will be relatively straightforward because they share Western business norms. In reality, however, the differences can be just as challenging. I've seen European leaders struggle with American expectations around autonomy, decision-making speed, accountability. And even within Europe, leadership styles vary widely, and those differences become amplified when working with US teams. The European companies that integrate most successfully learn quickly that they cannot simply export their home country operating model. They invest in strong local leadership and create opportunities to exchange ideas. They also clarify decision rights really early. And in short, they approach integration as a two-way learning process. For Chinese entrepreneurs, this is really important context. These challenges are not unique to China-US integration. They are universal leadership challenges. And when leaders work with culture deliberately, integration becomes faster and far more effective.
Wow. What I find very important in what you said is that these integration challenges are not unique to China and the US. Even European companies face similar difficulties when acquiring US business. The difference is that successful leaders treat integration as a two-way learning process, not a one-way export of their own operation model. So if these challenges are universal, let's look more closely at the operating difference themselves. From your perspective, what are the fundamental differences between how American teams operate and how Chinese entrepreneurs usually manage?
Jenny, that's a great question. I think from my experience, the main difference I have seen in my career is how authority and accountability are experienced. In many Chinese organizations I've seen, leadership authority is more centralized. Chinese employees often expect very clear direction, fast decisions, and strong guidance from the top. And loyalty and effort are expected and highly valued. In the US, it's a little different. Employees here expect autonomy, role clarity, and personal accountability. And here's what's important. They want to understand why and how decisions are made, not just what the decision is. So for American workers, we see speaking up or challenging ideas is a sign of professionalism, not a sign of disrespect or lack of commitment. Very importantly, neither model is better than the other. Here's the main point. Problems arise when leaders assume that their approach is universal. Effective global leaders learn to translate expectations into a local cultural context rather than simply imposing it on those employees.
Thank you, David. What I hear very clearly is that the real difference lies in how authority and accountability are experienced. Chinese organizations often emphasize centralized direction and speed, while US teams prioritize autonomy, role clarity, and the ability to challenge ideas. This difference often leads to frustration on the Chinese side. Many entrepreneurs describe a US team as slow or not proactive. David, let's talk about where the perception really comes from.
Well, I can understand that perception. I think it usually comes from misunderstanding US culture rather than any sort of capability of the US workforce. American workers tend to wait for clarity before acting. They really want to understand the priorities, the decision rights, the success criteria, and this can take time. Leaders who act too quickly without clarity can feel risky in the US system. There is here a strong accountability culture, but people are careful because here mistakes can have legal consequences or even career consequences. So when leaders interpret this caution as laziness, trust erodes. However, when they provide clarity and psychological safety, US teams often move very fast.
Thank you, David. This is a very important clarification. When clarity and psychological safety are provided, US team can move very quickly. That leads to the practical question. Many founders ask me directly, if we want to integrate successfully, what should we actually do differently?
Well, first, I would say take the time to explain the why and the what behind your vision. US teams usually need to understand not just the direction, but the reasoning behind that direction. And create space for questions, and where possible, allow team members to contribute to shaping the priorities. When people feel informed and involved, engagement tends to rise, it tends to increase, and speed follows. Second thing I would say is shift from a command and control model to rather alignment and engagement. And what I mean by that is, instead of asking, are they doing what I told them? Ask, do we agree on the priorities, on the metrics? Do we agree on what success looks like? When you have alignment, you create ownership, and ownership drives execution far more effectively than control. And the third thing I would say is deliberately build a cultural bridge. This requires curiosity on both sides. American teams need to be open to their Chinese partners' context and strategic intent, and Chinese leaders need to be curious about how US teams work, what they value. Investing in strong local leadership can be helpful. A trusted US leader can translate your strategy into action, build cultural expectations, build trust between Chinese decision makers and local teams. So just to kind of summarize, I would say first, take the time to explain where you're going and why. Secondly, focus on alignment, not command and control. And third, promote and encourage mutual curiosity and trust across the cultures.
Oh, David, thank you for your summary. I really appreciate how practical this is. You are not talking about culture in abstract terms. You are talking about explaining the why, building alignment instead of control, and deliberately creating cultural bridge through trusted local leaderships. In other words, integration is less about authority and more about ownerships. This also connects to a common misunderstanding I hear all the times. Many Chinese entrepreneurs question the commitment of US employees. From your perspective, what is the biggest misunderstanding here?
It's also a great question, Jenny, because that misunderstanding is real. And I think the misunderstanding comes from confusing independence with disloyalty. Americans appreciate independence and loyalty. But let me provide a clarification. American employees can be very committed, but their loyalty is often to the mission or the role, or even to the professional standards of their jobs, not to the hierarchy itself. They expect transparency, respect, and fairness in return. So when leaders meet those expectations, engagement is often high. When they don't, resistance shows up quickly. And here's an important point. Once resistance sets in, it can be very hard to overcome.
Wow, this distinction is extremely helpful. Independence does not mean disloyalty. It simply means loyalty is directed toward the mission, the role, and the professional standards, rather than hierarchy alone. When leaders provide transparency and fairness, commitment is very strong. When they don't, resistance shows up quickly. Now, let's make this even more practical. Many Chinese companies entering the US are not large multinationals yet. They don't have years to experiment. What practical advice would you give to these entrepreneurs, Debbie?
Good. Yeah, I'm asked this by my clients often. So first, do fewer things, but do them clearly. Focus on a small number of priorities and communicate those priorities consistently. Secondly, listen before changing. Spend the first 90 days understanding how the US business really operates, and then stay curious and open. Third, I would say treat integration as a leadership discipline. This is not an HR project. Leadership behavior matters more than any policy. And finally, if you can, get US cultural experts to help. If I can emphasize one point, Jenny, from our conversation, it is that culture is not a simple topic. It is the single success factor in an integration. So devote the energy and resources needed to do it right.
Well, thank you, David. I think what you just shared is extremely practical, especially for mid-sized Chinese companies that don't have the luxury of time or resource. Let me take a moment to summarize what I have learned from your conversation. What I am taking away is this: do few things, but do them clearly. Listen before changing, and treat integration as a leadership discipline, not an HR project. David, thank you so much for sharing your insight today. I truly appreciate not only your professional experience, but also the very balanced and global perspective you brought into this discussion. I believe this conversation will help many Chinese entrepreneurs better understanding their US team and approach organizational integration with more patience, clarity, and confidence. Thank you again for your time, and I hope we will have more opportunities to continue this dialogue in the future. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Appreciate the time.